Hey everyone, I'm Jack, and in today's video, I'll be ranking the bosses of Visceral Games' Dead Space from worst to best. Dead Space is a game that needs no introduction, one of the best of arguably the greatest generation of video games ever, and so massively important to the continuous evolution of the survival horror genre. After playing through Dead Space, I'd argue it's less a survival horror and more of a survival action experience, with a heavy leaning on its exciting combat, non-linear exploration and map design, and skill tree upgrades along with an in-game currency market system. As of now, I've played many horror games, and only one or two even come close to rivaling Dead Space in pure enjoyment value, those being Dead Space 2 and Resident Evil 2 Remake. Very good competition to have. Dead Space rewards thorough exploration and has unparalleled combat variety, with a fleet of unusual but useful weapons, each with unique upgrade paths and alternate abilities. While the combat is very engaging, the game isn't boss-centric like the Resident Evil series, for example, so with that in mind, this list is pretty arbitrary, and if you think differently from me, comment below. We now have a Patreon with great rewards at every tier, and we also have a Discord server, a TikTok, and an Instagram, all linked below. As one of my favorite games of all time, I am beyond excited for the Dead Space remake releasing in 2 days after we post this video. How do the bosses of the 2008 original stack up? Let's find out. At the back end of Chapter 4, the USG Ishimura is being bombarded with asteroids and is falling apart internally. You reach Hammond at the front hull of the planet cracker, and after a brief discussion over the current situation, he says the following.
By the way, Isaac, be careful. I saw something out there, I don't know what. I only got a glimpse. It was big. Really big.
Ironically, Hammond's death comes at the hands of an enhanced brute only a few chapters later, but the build-up for the initial brute was fucking terrifying. Actually seeing the hulking beast bust through a metal door was even more intimidating, and its speed is the scariest part of the whole ordeal. The brute is an amalgamation of human bodies, with an armored shell made of calcified bone and skin. From the front, the creature is invincible minus 2 weak points at its shoulder caps, but its backside is completely unprotected. For note, I used only the plasma cutter and line gun in my first playthrough of Dead Space, and without the flamethrower, these weak spots are difficult to hit due to the armor on the brute's arms and collarbone. Initially, I struggled to find openings to attack the creature, as when you're within range of its arms it uses its melee moveset, and when you're out of its range it either sprints towards you or uses explosive projectiles. If you can bait the brute to sprint enough, you can deal damage to its back while it slowly turns to face you to where it will curl in a ball to protect its limbs. This is when you can finish it off. Although, this strategy is not very efficient to begin with, and is practically useless with the introduction of enhanced brutes, identical in moveset but with a significant increase in damage and weak point resistance. Now, I know you've been waiting for me to say it, but just use stasis. During the first few chapters, you likely won't realize how good stasis is, and due to the abundance of stasis packs and recharge stations, you'll constantly have a full tank of it in your arsenal. At least, I never realized how useful stasis was until I managed to kill a brute in under 15 seconds from using it to slow down the creature, and then casually walk behind it and fire off my fully upgraded line gun up its poo chute. Stasis is the answer for brutes in just about every other challenging combat sequence in Dead Space, and with maximum duration through power nodes, turns them from a terrifying challenge to a free rare item drop. Throughout the game, your sole combat objective is to cut off the limbs and stomp the corpses of every necromorph in your path. The Hunter is the lone exception to this rule, it being an infinitely limb-regenerating necromorph classified as a regenerator-type necromorph. The Hunter was biologically engineered by unitologist Dr. Chalice Mercer through inserting a chunk of the corruption into a crew member aboard the Ishimura. It's unkillable in base combat and follows you throughout chapters 5 and 10 in a similar vein to Mr. X or Nemesis, a looming presence always close enough to cause tension and a formidable foe when engaged in combat. As I've said repeatedly, the Hunter can infinitely regenerate its limbs even with just a torso, so to kill the creature you need to use your environment, as well as stasis. Don't act surprised. In chapter 5, Kendra has you locked in a cryogenic laboratory. Ideally, you should kill the base necromorphs in the arena while using stasis to keep the Hunter at bay, then bait the Hunter into the cryogenic chamber and cut off as many limbs as possible. Each limb removed gives you a few seconds of animation to use to your advantage. After rendering the creature useless, use stasis to slow it down even more, then activate the chamber and freeze it, halting the Hunter for the time being. In Chapter 10, the Hunter returns and follows you all the way to the back end of the Ishimura, where Isaac and Dr. Kyne stored the marker onto a shuttle to send it back to Aegis 7. The same rules apply, but you'll need to bring the Hunter near the shuttle's thrusters, then turn them on to burn and kill it for good, putting to death one of the most memorable necromorphs in the Dead Space series and setting up the endgame in epic fashion. In a game where combat rules are constant, spectacle always wins. With that in mind, the Slug is the least spectacular of the 3 core bosses, but still great nonetheless. How do you beat a ship-sized necromorph with a plasma cutter, you ask? Well, you don't use a plasma cutter. You actually fight the Slug using an anti-asteroid cannon after finishing Chapter 8's main objective and contacting the USM Valor on an SOS call. The Slug has one bulbous weak point on each of its 5 tentacles and throws a constant stream of debris at the Ishimura's hull, slowly degrading its integrity. Balancing debris and damaging the Slug is far more challenging than I initially thought it'd be, but like bosses similar to it, take Cerberus from Dante's Inferno, the more limbs you remove, the easier it becomes. The debris moves rapidly, however, and each hit does anywhere from 4 to 10% of the hull's damage limit. That said, the Slug's tentacles don't have much health, and you can even tank a few chunks of debris to focus on the Slug to make it easier. Following its death, the Slug releases the Ishimura's blast doors, only for the USM Valor crew to send back a death message and crash into the Ishimura, spiraling Isaac's escape plans out of control. The Hive Mind is a polarizing finale among the Dead Space fanbase. On the one hand, it had been hinted at as the source of all the parody in Dead Space and concludes the story with the grandest spectacle of all, but on the other, it has an entirely separate feel from any other combat sequence in the game. With the Hunter, Slug, and as you'll see, the Leviathan, Isaac uses his ingenuity and creativity to defeat the seemingly impenetrable forces of alien nature. When fighting the Hive Mind, however, the cramped and dark atmosphere featured throughout all of the USG Ishimura is replaced with that of a superhero movie. While both sides are strong arguments, I'm a moderate. I think that it's an enjoyable final boss, but suffers from dropping the atmosphere kept up through the previous 11 chapters for action spectacle. It gets bonus points for fucking annihilating Kendra though. Like the Slug, the Hive Mind has 5 weak spots across its amorphous head, which you pop one by one. The necromorph mass will slam his tentacles and follow with a scream that gives ample time to damage each spot, and there are even explosive canisters along the ground that you can use with kinesis alongside your weapons to damage it further. As long as you're just moving in a lateral direction, you will evade the tentacles, a great bit of attack design as Dead Space lacks a dodge mechanic. Once broken down, the Hive Mind will pick Isaac up and bring him towards its mouth, like the drag tentacle segments earlier in the game. If you survive, the Hive Mind will open its central chest cavity, revealing a beating heart with another 5 weak spots. This phase works through the Hive Mind's rib cages, which open and close between its swings. This timing window is quite small, however, so I recommend the plasma cutter, or something fast, unlike the line gun, which failed to hit the heart in time more than once. The Hive Mind is a very engaging final boss that, while enjoyable, fails to deliver a satisfying ending to Isaac's initial journey with Nicole and the marker. When I started writing this script, I actually had the Leviathan at number 3, the Slug at 2, and the Hive Mind at 1. Ugh. I'd like to use recency bias as my defense. I have a really horrible tendency to listen to a song I like, play a great game, or for the sake of the video fight a fun boss battle, and immediately call it one of my favorites ever and rank it the best in whatever respective game or ranking I'm putting it in for a video or just a list. Then I'll replay it and come back to reality sometimes. With the Leviathan, I had an inverse experience. In retrospect, this was easily the best designed boss from a mechanical gameplay sense, and also the best visually, a large mass with a central cavity and 3 tentacles surrounding a mouth. By this point, you know the drill. The tentacles each have a bulbous yellow weak spot that you break off one by one. However, the twist comes in that the tentacles pull themselves inside the Leviathan's main body and are only open to damage when they fully extend and swipe at Isaac. This seemingly counterintuitive design works well on occasion. Unlike some horror games, Isaac can move while aiming his weapon, but the tentacles have broad, unclear movesets that usually boil down to random luck on whether or not you get hit by them. That is, if you're an idiot like me and don't use no gravity to your advantage, and zero-G jump to another region of the domed arena and shoot from a separate angle. Either way, the Leviathan is well balanced and doesn't do too much damage, so you should be fine in slowly chipping away at the tentacles until they're blown off entirely, no matter what approach you choose. After you break all 3 tentacles, the mouth opens, revealing a uvula that shoots out some form of corruption chime at Isaac. In this phase, you have 2 options. You can shoot the matter and send it back towards the Leviathan, or cheese the creature by using the plasma cutter and aim at the weak point and fire immediately when the Leviathan opens its mouth. The more damage it takes, the more discolored it gets until it eventually implodes, finishing off my personal favorite fight in Dead Space with incomparable grandiose. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Stay tuned for a boss ranking of the Dead Space remake coming out very soon, and otherwise remember to like and subscribe if you haven't. That's all for now. Deuces.